We're convening this summit because Canadians need serious action. A catchy slogan won't stop auto theft. A 2-minute YouTube video won't disrupt organized crime.
How about shelter bans, surgeries, and medical interventions for minors, as your own party members suggested?
Medical interventions like what?
That is the language that your party
What medical
used.
interventions?
Well, you would have to ask your party members.
What medical interventions?
Such as puberty blockers and hormone
For minors?
Yeah. Yes.
Irreversible? I think that we should protect children and their ability to make adult decisions when they're adults.
Auto thefts across Canada and a new gender identity policy in Alberta quickened the pulse of Canadian politics this week, especially when Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre held a rare scrum with Ottawa reporters to talk about that first issue, but was pushed to take a position on that second issue. We're going to break it all down with our panel of party insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. Melanie Richer is away this week, but Cheryl Oates is here. She was the communications director for former Alberta NDP Premier Rachel Notley. Cheryl, thank you so much. Happy Friday, gang. Good to have you all here. All right.
Good to be here.
Yeah, I can see the excitement. Yeah, all right. All right, Fred, well, let's start with you. We asked you guys to pick like a play of the week, an issue of the week, a misplay of the week, and you pick a play of the week, the CPC stealing the government's thunder on auto theft. What's your take there?
Funny use of words too, right, with auto theft.
Yeah.
Look, the Liberals showed us a few weeks ago or months ago they were going to bring in this big summit on auto theft on Thursday of this week. And the Conservatives, I think, brilliantly, strategically, got ahead of this where Mr. Poilievre had a press conference on Monday laying out his policy on this. They had an opposition day Tuesday where they went through this, and Wednesday was the vote. And he also had he had a press conference Monday in Brampton, I believe Tuesday in Montreal, hammering on this issue. So for 3 days, he was setting the agenda on auto theft. And then Thursday was the summit, and it felt like it was old news to me and to lots of people I talked to. They were sick of talking about auto theft now. They totally hijacked the Liberal narrative and message on this, and this is all about talking to voters and getting the message out. This week, the Conservatives owned when the Liberals clearly set up to try to do it.
Greg, what do you make of that point? I guess this is the challenge when weeks in advance you say, hey, we're going to do something on this day, and your opponents can schedule something in the run-up to it. What's your take on how that played out?
Well, the visuals that the viewers are seeing right now are of the summit. That's what people actually saw. Nice try, Fred. But, yes, I mean, it's not as if we didn't know this was coming, and sure, you put a video out because you think this is going to happen. And you get in the media play of the day, which is fine. But I think, he tried to do this in Montreal. He got some pushback from a reporter. We can talk about that in a little bit. Yeah. But the actual day of the event, I just saw continuously Liberal ministers scrumming with people from the industry. I saw Patrick Brown, who, a former Conservative leadership candidate, now a mayor, who's been very strong on the issue of auto theft. I will tell you, as a person who has had my car stolen a year ago this month, I'm not going to look at this through a political lens. I'm going to tell you, I watched the security video of my car being stolen and a guy standing next to it for a minute, and then all the lights flash, he gets in and he drives away. I will tell you, the municipality ticketed my abandoned vehicle, even though it was reported stolen. So I learned that in my city, there is a silo. So before we even get to Montreal and there, the shipping containers, there are some issues. And I was listening for what people were saying. There was a great interview you did this week from an industry association, I believe, David, and he was happy with it. So again, I do, the Conservative leader has had some really successful videos. I don't think this was the one this week that caught people's attention.
I just want to get Cheryl and Fred, and I'll come back to you. But Cheryl, it shows sort of that campaign footing that Poilievre is on, right? That when you know something is coming, he gets out ahead of it or tries to get out ahead of it. Your mileage may vary on the success, but what do you think of the move this week?
Well, I don't think this all comes down to timeline. Like, we all know in politics, speed kills, and it's nice to get out in front. But even though I am not a CPC supporter, I think we have to give them credit for the fact that on this issue, they were just far more skilled when it comes to communications. They found a way to connect with people the way that they're getting the information online. Government has a bad habit of sort of getting into a cookie cutter way of rolling out communications. And I can say that, having been a former communications director, but that there's, sometimes 5 boxes you check them all, you push out an announcement. Whereas the opposition is a little more nimble and they can reach their voters where their supporters are and put out information the way that their voters want to receive it. On the other side of things, when you're in the opposition, you have a lot more leeway about what you can say. And when Pierre Poilievre goes out there and says, jail, not bail, people nod their heads and they say, yeah, that's what I want. But there is no expectation of him to roll out a plan about how he will move forward on that and how he will implement it. And so that's a lot harder for Trudeau and the Liberal government to do, because someone's holding them to account. If they announce something, they have to be able to do it. And that standard's just not applied to the opposition anywhere.
Right, and I think Greg wants to get into that a little bit later. But Fred, you had a rebuttal to Greg now that Cheryl has sort of taken your side here.
Right.
It's two against one.
Cheryl said. Great to have you on. This is I think a great example. Like I've been in government, I've been in opposition, and I've never seen an opposition like the Conservatives at really zeroing in on messaging and dominating the issues like this and planning this out and doing this. Like you had a press conference in Brampton one day, Montreal the next, and have an opposition day motion in the House. Like that's a lot of coordination they did.
Yeah.
I think it shows us the level the Conservatives are functioning on right now.
So Greg, just because you're outnumbered here, how do the Liberals counter this, right? Because they are a prisoner of governing by being the government, right? You have to do things a certain way. You got to run your policies through the department. And when you're going to do a thing like a summit, you've got to get all these different people together, whereas the opposition leader's office can just do it as quick as they can move, right?
Yeah, and not everything is a narrative. And as the Prime Minister said, not everything can be reduced to a YouTube video. And I think what's important is what you want out of a summit like that is that you've got some, for lack of a better word, ambassadors on that issue that'll go back to their industry associations, they'll go back to their municipalities, and they're going to say, you know what, I know what the polls are like and I know what people think, but I'll tell you right now, the government is seized on this issue and they're doing the right things. And from the reactions I heard the night of, on your show, on other radio programs, it seemed to be the takeaway.
Yeah, I was struck by Danny Smythe, who's the chief of police in Winnipeg and the head of the Association of Canadian Chiefs of Police, who kind of said they have the things in the criminal code they need to do. And if you just start like giving tougher sentences to the people at the front line to steal the cars, you're going to take out the low-level people in the crime organizations and not really get to the heart of the matter. So it's complicated, is the bottom line of almost every major problem like that. Speaking of which, Cheryl, this brings us to the issue you wanted to talk about this week, and that is the Alberta gender policy, which has dominated conversation in a lot of ways.
It has. And I mean, you saw Danielle Smith come out last week with first a pre-produced video and then a full press conference talking about the policy she intends to introduce that would essentially limit health care for transgender youth. And immediately across the province, you saw the group most harmed by this and their allies speak out in rallies across the province. And this week, that hasn't got any quieter. And in fact, doctors have spoken out, experts have spoken out, and part of the discussion is zeroing in on two things that it seems the UCP has sort of gone against their own values. One is that now they are saying that if you are a parent and you agree with your doctor and you agree with your child and you believe that the best care for them is for them to have medical intervention, the government is now saying, no, we have decided that that care is not allowed in Alberta. And so they're actually limiting parental rights. The second is that at the UCP AGM late last year, they passed a motion saying that no third party should come between an Albertan and their doctor. And that was met with quite an applause from the UCP AGM. And this policy, the government being the third party, obviously goes against that. So this discussion continues, and I think the government is feeling quite a bit of heat this week from outside sources. Fred,
Pierre Poilievre was asked about this a bunch of times this week. We're going to talk about that with Greg's pick, but he is framing this strictly as parental rights. And in a response to the court decision today on Bill C-92, he said we're the only party that believes in parental rights. He's really coming down on that side of this argument. And as we discussed last Friday, the email sent out suggesting his caucus not talk about it has held. He's been the only person to speak on it from the Conservatives.
Right. It's certainly a complicated and difficult topic to talk on, and it goes off their message. They're not talking about the issues they want to talk about when they weigh into this. Parental rights is something that they've clearly polled on extensively, and they see that does resonate with Canadians because it sounds at its base level, yeah, parents should have rights when you think about it. But when you get into a bit further, that's where the complications come from.
Like reading the charter.
Well, but also just what does that mean? Like if someone is transgender and is afraid to talk to their parent, the parent's the problem, right? So that's the issue, I think the complicating issue on this. makes it very difficult.
But Greg, just before we get to your pick on this, Daniel Smith has unleashed a conversation here. I know it was happening when Blaine Higgs did it in New Brunswick, Scott Moe did it in Saskatchewan, and however you feel about the approaches to this, her going further than just a pronoun policy in the school system and going into the medical system and substituting, government edict for, as Cheryl pointed out, parental consent with a doctor, has really lit a fire here on this one.
Absolutely it has. And since we spoke last week on this, I suggested last week that I thought this was a distraction against her other problems in terms of health care, in terms of she started the Alberta pension plan and now it's very unpopular. I also said that in the other provinces, watch the polling. There's a poll out today in Saskatchewan that has the NDP ahead of the Saskatchewan Party.
Yep.
So to me, that suggests that, Scott Moe may have thought that I do need something to kind of make people angry and set a fire here. I think what's really interesting is that Doug Ford totally avoided this when asked about this week.
They don't want to touch
and he's
it.
got a huge population, and he's also, he spent a lot of time talking about Bonnie Crombie, the Liberal leader lately, but he's not going to touch it because I think there's a PC issue here, progressive conservative versus conservative in whatever other party at the provincial level you want to call. But I think this is a distraction. When you interviewed her, others interviewed her, there was no scientific basis. It's how she feels. And I remember when I worked in provincial politics, we would do town halls about things like classrooms and school buses, and you would have people weighing in that had not had children or grandchildren in a classroom in a long time. And I get it. I understand why parents are concerned.
It's emotional.
A lot of families are experiencing this. We don't have to go very far to find that. But the fact that she doesn't seem to have any evidence on this, I thought was quite frightening.
Yeah, Cheryl, just quickly on the Saskatchewan poll, Andrew Thompson, who was on the show on Thursday nights, former Saskatchewan cabinet minister in an NDP government, he'd suggested that Scott Moe started down this path because he was losing rural support to a more conservative party, and the NDP were a threat to him in the cities. How do you think this, I know Daniel Smith, fresh mandate, just elected. How do you think this affects things in Alberta?
The way things played out in Saskatchewan was, in the beginning, just like everywhere else, if you ask someone, do parents know best for their children? Do parents have a right to know what's going on in their children's lives? Overwhelmingly, people say yes. And then they learn more about what the implications of these policies are and what the dangers are, and you start to see the polling move. And then in Saskatchewan, for example, when you have the move shot down by the courts and the province has to use with the notwithstanding clause to push the policy through, then you really start to see the polling move. And I don't think in Saskatchewan, the Saskatchewan Party won any new voters over with this policy. In fact, I think they pushed more away.
Fred, how do you see that? Because they're trying to protect a right flank there, is the argument.
That's what it is, the parental rights, where there's a base of support that they think they can fire up on that. And that's why, I see New Brunswick doing it, Saskatchewan, they have elections this year. So they're trying to do that. What I don't understand is why Alberta did this. They just had an election like 8 months ago. They're 3.5 years away from their next one. I don't know what they're trying to get out of this. And at the same time, like in Ontario, I don't think we'll ever see this come up from Premier Ford.
Yeah, Cheryl's still wearing the scars from the Team Notley campaign there earlier this year. Sorry, Cheryl, didn't mean to pick at old wounds. But Greg, look, we got about 5 minutes left before we say goodbye. Let's get to your pick, because you want to talk about the media again, but you're not going to be as mean to us this time, right? Am I understanding it right?
Guys, you dish it out, you got to take it. I'm just saying. But there was a little clip earlier of the scrum that the Conservative leader did this week. He did a scrum in Ottawa. And to be fair to some of the journalists that have had to show up to ask him questions at events outside of Ottawa, one of the things I'm told is that there's not a lot of notice. So you don't have a lot of preparation. But I'd encourage people to read Justin Ling's column this week on Substack, because he went there to Montreal and he talked about, it's a very similar style to Stephen Harper, where there is one question, you get a chance of 1 of 5 questions. If you're a reporter, no follow-up. And
they take the mic from you after you ask your question.
Physically take the mic. I remember that there's a Trump staffer who snatched it out of someone's hand as well. Not that I'm making a comparison, because of course that would be bad. But in Ottawa, that scrum, you can find it on social media. I encourage folks to look at it. My favorite part is when a reporter says to the Conservative leader, "We're journalists. We ask the questions." And I think it was a bit of a wake-up call. There have been a lot of people concerned on both sides of politics and media that the level of scrutiny for someone around this, and the type of issues that we're getting into, case in point, the one we just discussed, are way too complex to let someone skate by and not have to answer tough questions.
But you know, Cheryl, there are rules of engagement in scrums and press conferences, and Pierre Poilievre has disrupted them, you know, in a big way, and I don't think the media quite knows how to respond to it. So this was a rare thing for him to do a scrum in Ottawa that he doesn't control the start and end of, and reporters are there shouting questions at him. What do you make of Greg's point and how that sort of played out this week as he was pushed to sort of give some clarity on the Alberta policy you raised?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably scares them back to their original, the way that they've been engaging with the media. And I think it's a complete disservice to Canadians. Like, we expect that the Prime Minister's first goal is to be accountable to Canadians, and journalists are there on behalf of Canadians to answer the questions. And I think not only is that not upholding what the expectation of the office is, but also if you are a politician that is not willing to stand up and stand proudly in the policies and the policy decisions that you have made and answer questions on those policies, you shouldn't be in the job. And that's why that exists. And that's why in most jurisdictions in Canada up to this point, there has been sort of a unwritten agreement between politicians, the staff, and the press about what's fair and how those engagements will go on. And I just think it's an absolute disservice to Canadians if Pierre Poilievre wants to throw that all out the window.
Fred, how do you think they think this went? Do you think we'll see more scrums from Mr. Poilievre, or do we go back to 5 questions on the road?
My prediction is this will be the last scrum you'll ever see from Pierre Poilievre. It showed where discipline breaks down, where their messaging, they've been so good at controlling the narrative, and they threw him into a chaotic scenario where he couldn't do that. He's been very good at press conferences. He's tough. He's aggressive. He tries to get the message and the clips that he wants to get out. When you're in a scrum, it's chaos. And he walked into that, and I think it's a lesson learned for them. That's not something they should be doing.
Susan Delacourt made a very smart point on the show, I thought, a couple of weeks ago when she said Pierre Poilievre is very good at media he controls and not so good at media he doesn't control. But, you go into a campaign, you win the job. You can't control everything as tightly as they do at this point in time when there's real accountability, right?
In 2011, when Harper won a majority government, I don't remember him being scrummed. He did the 5 questions, and a lot of the time, a lot of the news stories that they were pushing out were that he's only taking 5 questions. That was news stories that people were running instead of the messages. And that worked for us. We were in government, and we were pushing our messages through other outlets, and it worked.
Right, but it was Michael Ignatieff, so that might have played a role. But anyway, Greg, we got about 35 seconds left. Is your wrap-up point on this?
You can't. This is not an election-ready strategy, because I know what you're trying to say about 2011, Fred, but there are far too many, especially now, there won't be as many reporters around. Things will be a lot more fluid.
Yeah.
This will not work during an election.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I have no idea what the media access will be. I mean, who knows how that one's going to go. Thanks so much, gang. I always like to end my week this way. Greg McEachern, Fred Delory, and Cheryl Oates, thank you so much for filling in.